If you're watching this video, I'll assume that you already have a reason to learn JavaScript, so I'll spare you the typical sales pitch. But before we start writing any code, we will need to have a code editor. Theoretically, you could use a text editor like Notepad or TextEdit, but those are not designed for writing code and the process will be much more difficult. A proper code editor can highlight some mistakes and offer automatic completion and help you in various other ways that won't make sense until you've actually written some code. If you already happen to have a favorite code editor and it's capable of handling JavaScript, then you can use that. Otherwise, I would recommend that you use Visual Studio Code. I'm not saying it's the best code editor in existence, but it is the best free one that I've found. I actually prefer to use another one called WebStorm, which is not free, but I won't recommend that to you specifically because it's not free. Also note that Visual Studio Code is not the same thing as Visual Studio without code in the name. In addition to a code editor, it will be useful to install Node.js. This is a runtime environment for JavaScript that can be run without a browser. It originally was used on web servers, but it now also runs a lot of desktop and mobile software. And it is needed for many developer tools. Even if your goal is to only use JavaScript for front-end web development, installing Node.js can be very beneficial. One last thing that could be beneficial to install if you are using Visual Studio Code is an extension called Live Server. It is useful when doing front-end web development because it will allow you to open your web page in a browser easily, and it will update the browser automatically when you save changes to your code. We will start by doing the traditional Hello World program. This is a long-standing tradition that extends far beyond JavaScript. It's a tradition in almost all programming classes. And the reason for the tradition is that this is usually a program that is the simplest possible one that actually does something. You theoretically could write something even simpler than the hello world, but if the program is actually not supposed to do anything, it's actually harder for you to figure out if you did things correctly. Because sometimes when you do things wrong, it doesn't just cause an error message. Sometimes nothing happens at all when something actually should. So when the program working correctly actually doesn't do anything, you don't really know for sure that you did it the right way. This one line of code is the entire Hello World program. Save it as a file called script.js. The script part is a commonly used name when there is only one JavaScript file. This is only a tradition and doesn't have any special meaning, so you can actually change that to some other name and it would be fine. The JS part is a requirement that specifies that this is a JavaScript file. One way to run this program is by typing node script.js in the terminal, followed by pressing enter or return. If you installed Node.js as I had recommended earlier, this should output the phrase hello world. Note that the actual name of the file must be specified, so if you changed script.js to something else like hello.js, then you would type node hello.js instead. Also note that Visual Studio Code automatically sets the current directory of the terminal to match the project. If you instead open the terminal separately, you would need to navigate to the correct directory using a cd command. I can't tell you the exact cd command to type because that depends on where you saved your file. If you don't know how to use this command, I recommend using a code editor that automatically opens the terminal in the correct directory for you, as Visual Studio Code does. In addition to running in Node.js, we can run this code in a browser. To do that, we must first create an HTML file that has a script tag. I'm creating an index.html file with the standard boilerplate code. For simplicity, I am placing the script tag in the body. It can also go in the head, and there are some specific reasons for doing that, but that is a topic for a separate video. Once we have that set up, we can run the JavaScript code by opening the index.html file in a browser. If you install Live Server, you can start it by clicking on Go Live when index.html is open. If you don't have Live Server, you can usually drag the index file to the browser window. It's also possible to type in the path in the address bar if you know it, but that tends to be an error-prone approach. Opening this page shows nothing, but we can see the result of the JavaScript code by opening the browser console. The shortcut for this in Chrome is Ctrl-Shift-J or Command-Option-J on Mac. The shortcut in Firefox is Ctrl-Shift-K or Command-Option-K on Mac. In Safari, the shortcut is Command-Option-C, but you might need to enable the Develop menu if it's your first time accessing the console in Safari. Once we have the console open, you can see that the code worked. If you get an error message about failing to load a resource, you can ignore it. That comes from the missing favicon. If that really bothers you, you can add a favicon and link it in the HTML, but this is completely unrelated to JavaScript. I won't be offering a detailed explanation right now about how the code works or how it's written. Those are matters to be discussed later on. The point of this particular exercise is just to write some code and to get it to work. Once you know how to do that, then the only thing left is to learn how to write JavaScript code, and that is what the rest of the series is about.